Hey everybody, Professor Moore here. So whenever I'm teaching an American history course, the lynching of Black Americans is one of the darkest and most upsetting chapters that I cover. It's almost impossible to imagine or comprehend the level of depravity and violence that was involved in these killings. And I honestly believe that when you bring an accurate discussion of lynching into the American story, you'll never be able to look at American history the same again. In order to have a factual and accurate discussion of lynching with my students, I've spent years researching lynchings, and I've read hundreds of accounts of lynchings from historical newspaper databases, and I would like to share some of the conclusions I found from my research with you. So, lynching describes the illegal murder of Black Americans by white mobs. There was no justice, no judge, no jury, no trial. This was public murder. But what were the reasons that the lynchers gave for these killings? How did they justify themselves? What were the supposed crimes that these Black Americans were being killed for? Now, during the time period, the lynchers often made the false accusation that they were killing an individual because they had assaulted a white woman. However, anti-lynching activist Ida B. Wells did her own research and found that this was completely false, and that in the majority of lynching cases, the only crime that the Black individual had committed was being Black in a white supremacist society. However, protecting white women continued to be a popular explanation for lynchings. For example, Caleb Gadley was lynched in Kentucky in 1894 for walking behind the wife of his white employer. Keith Bowen was lynched in Mississippi in 1889 for accidentally entering and then leaving a room where 3 white women were. General Lee was lynched in South Carolina in 1904 for knocking on the door of a white woman's house. Thomas Miles was lynched in 1912 for inviting a white woman to go have a drink with him. Jeff Brown was lynched in 1916 for accidentally bumping into a white girl as he ran to catch a train. Parks Banks was lynched in Mississippi in 1922 for having the picture of a white woman in his possession. In 1889 in Loudon, Virginia, a Black 14-year-old named Orion Anderson was lynched by a mob of white men. What was his crime? He was playing with a white girl and he put on a mask and he scared her, and he was killed for it. In 1930, John Wilkins was lynched for smiling at a white woman on a train. Sometimes lynchings were the result of a Black American breaking some unwritten white supremacist rule. For example, Jesse Thornton was lynched in Alabama in 1949 for not saying Mr. as he talked to a white police officer. Some of the other reasons for lynchings were speaking disrespectfully to white people, arguing with a white person, insulting a white person, refusing to step off of the sidewalk to make way for a white person, or just standing around. It's clear that there never was any real crime associated with lynching. The crime that these people were being killed for was the crime of having Black skin. So the next question becomes, who were the lynchers? And you might be surprised to learn that it was not racist terrorist groups like the Ku Klux Klan. Yes, those groups did kill Black Americans, but they were not responsible for the majority of lynchings. So, who were the lynchers? The lynchers were doctors, teachers, grocers, businessmen, lawyers, parents, children, police officers. It was the entire community that was participating in these killings. There was nowhere to turn for help. You couldn't go to the authorities because the police officers were participating in the lynching. You can see from this photograph, the caption reads, "Lynching in action. State troopers and citizens of Gordonsville, Virginia formed a posse of 1,000 which fired for 6 hours on the cabin of a 65-year-old Negro worker and his sister. They finally burned the hovel and both victims." It's ironic that when the bodies of lynching victims were brought to the morgue, they often wrote under cause of death, "death at the hands of persons unknown." But that is a complete lie. They knew exactly whose hands had done it because it was the entire community. Just look at these mugshots from individuals that were involved in a lynching in South Carolina in 1947. All of the men in this picture participated in that lynching, and not a single individual was charged with a crime. Here's another article from 1943. The headline reads, "These men might ordinarily pass for decent citizens. However, all of these individuals had recently taken part in a lynching." And when people were asked to describe what these men were like, here's what they said. "These are some of the best men in the county. Men who are considered here to be the best representatives in the community of law, order, and justice. They called these men good Christians. They called them the best citizens." The lynchers were not seen as monsters, but upstanding members of the community. They were not treated as pariahs or social outcasts because everyone in the community was participating in these killings. The next point to emphasize is that lynchings were not spontaneous acts of violence that were committed in a fit of rage. These were organized, planned events that were attended by thousands of people. Usually a lynching victim was kept for a few days, sometimes in a jail cell or held in another location, and this gave the lynchers time to advertise the event. You can see here from this newspaper ad, the date, the time, the location of lynchings was widely distributed in order for more people to come and participate in this killing. And sometimes people drove across state lines. They would travel hundreds of miles in order to watch these murders take place. Lynchings were usually held on weekends, so more people could attend. However, if they were held on a weekday, all of the businesses would close down so their employees could go watch the lynching, and all of the schools would also close down. They would ring the bells, and all of the students would walk out in a single file, and their teachers and parents would take them to these lynchings. And when they got there, they would hear musicians playing music, and they would find vendors selling snacks and drinks. Now, these lynchings were not done under the cover of dark in the middle of the woods. They were done in public, in broad daylight, in the middle of Main Street, on the public square, sometimes even on the courthouse lawn. Now, if you look at this photograph, you would never know that these people are going to a lynching. These individuals are flocking to go watch a public murder take place in broad daylight in America. If you look at this photograph, you would never know that what these individuals are all straining to see is a lynching, the killing of a Black American. If you were to look at this photograph with no context, it looks like a carnival or a concert, and that is exactly the type of atmosphere that lynchings had. People were not ashamed to take part and to watch these lynchings. These were nights that these individuals wanted to remember. That's why usually during all lynchings, there were professional photographers that were taking pictures of the killings and turning them into postcards. And they were also taking pictures of individuals that were there that wanted to commemorate and remember this night. If you look at this picture and you see the faces of these individuals, it's very hard to imagine that just right off the screen are 3 young Black teenagers that have been brutally killed. This is a picture of a lynching that took place in Florida in 1935. And this is a young girl watching an individual be killed right in front of her eyes. And I want you to look at her face and look at the smile on her face. The fact that a young girl could watch a Black American be brutally killed right in front of her and then smile while looking at that dead body shows you just how much Black Americans had been dehumanized. And it shows you how much white America was desensitized to this violence. To accurately tell the story of American history, this level of violence has to be brought back into the main narrative. We are never going to be able to move forward as a nation or a people until we finally deal with the legacy of this violence.